welcome to the Just for the Health of It podcast interviews with our local health expert. I'm your host, Drew Crawford, and today we're joined by Dr. Kayalar, one of the cardiologists at Adirondack Cardiology, sort of underneath Glens Falls Hospital, but absolutely awesome pleasure to have you on today. It's not very often a cardiologist is able to take time out of their day and talk to us, so huge honor, huge pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on today.
It's my pleasure. I'm happy to. Thank you.
Absolutely. And so, before we kind of start talking about our topic today, which is women's heart health for February, Go Red for Women Week is obviously right around the corner. But before we kind of talk about that, if you wouldn't mind just kind of introducing yourself, who are you? How long have you been in the position? What are some of your credentials? And if you can, any interesting facts? I'm not saying you got to go above and beyond, but Dr. Mahaidi, one of the pediatricians that we had on our first episode, she talked about how she played water polo in college. So maybe you got something similar, maybe not, but either way, it's an awesome pleasure to have you on.
Thank you for having me. My name is Dr. Kayalar. I'm with Adirondack Cardiology. We're part of Glens Falls Hospital. I've been with Adirondack Cardiology now since 2009. That's when I came to this area, to Warren County. And prior to that, I was in Syracuse for training in cardiology. And since our cardiologists are also internists, we have to go through internal medicine training, which I did in Framingham in Massachusetts. And prior to that, actually my medical school and my upbringing is from Germany. So I was born there and I grew up in Germany. I went to medical school there, was in training there, and then came to America. That was in 2003. Nice. So 20 years ago now. And with Glens Falls Hospital, we take care of a large variety of patients. And we're always busy, but we're always happy to help our community. And I thank you for doing your service to the community and help promote, health topics to bring them to awareness of the people. And
absolutely. So that's why they bring the young people like me on to give new ideas, right?
Yes.
So women's heart health, it's right around the corner, and it's something that not a lot of people often think about, but it's a much bigger issue in women than a lot of women tend to realize. I mean, if we want to go over numbers and statistics here, 1 in every 5 female deaths nationally are due to heart disease. That's 20%. 20% of deaths are responsible from heart disease, and that's obviously not something that we obviously want to hear. That's not obviously something that we want in our county. So how important is your heart health? Not just whether you're a woman or a man or anything, you need to take care of your heart. And so how important is your heart health to just your daily activity and how you live?
It's obviously very important. And what ties in with heart health is cardiovascular health. So anything that is good for your heart is good for your vessels in general. So that's true for your perfusion of the brain and of all your organs, carotid vessels, abdominal vessels. So anything that you can do to keep your vasculature healthy of the heart will translate into healthier vessels throughout your body. So all the things we may talk about in this podcast will translate to vascular health in general. So there's some things that are maybe specific to the heart, but many things that are generalizable are healthy for vascular health in general. And of course, it's a very big topic and of much importance because a big portion of our conditions and diseases are vascular in nature. Yes.
That's an important piece to bring up, is that the heart kind of relates to everything. And I mean, it's one of the most important things in your body. If it doesn't work, then there's not much else that's going to start working. It's a very, I'm sorry?
It's an important organ.
Yes, absolutely. It's incredible. And I mean, when you really start, I tried a little bit. Every time we always bring a guest on, I always like to try and challenge their knowledge, or try and get onto the same basis of knowledge. And granted, you went to medical school and you're an actual cardiologist, and I am a 23-year-old who got bored at work. So I try to look it up, but it gets very complex, and it's a very complex organ. It's something that I think not a lot of people give an awful lot of credit to. But obviously with women's heart health, it's a very big thing. We always hear about with men cut back the potatoes, cut back the meat, cut back the red meats, maybe don't drink beer every single day, make sure, obviously get up and exercise and all these different things, but not the same amount gets said for women and women's heart health. And that's why we're seeing such a big thing, not only here in Warren County with, 335.8 cardiovascular disease deaths per 100,000, which is 57 more deaths than New York State as a whole, which is obviously a very, very high rate. Obviously with all those things, we obviously want to make sure that everybody has the potential to live their happiest and healthiest life. And with that, how does somebody start to prioritize their heart health? What are some things that they can do? What are some of the ways that they can really take that first step and say, this is what I'm going to do to take care of my body?
Yeah. And I think awareness is the first step. So usually your heart will function in the background quietly and you're not much aware of it. It's just there for you. But we shouldn't take it for granted, because if it is having a problem, it can be, of course, a significant one. In general, heart health translates into healthier living in general. So any level of activity is not just good for the heart, it's also good for heart disease related conditions like blood pressure, hypertension, and diabetes. So what I see often is activities that are not heart healthy, such as smoking, and the lack of activities that would be heart healthy is just like moving. And moving does not have to be exercise. It was good to exercise, but any activity is better than no activity. So anything that's other than being sedentary is good. So oftentimes I find that walking is very much underrated. It's one of the best things you can do. If you get up and just walk at a good pace, that's much better than not doing that. It's much easier to do than find time to go to the gym. It's a little bit of a hurdle for some patients to find time for the gym or get a membership and be on schedule, but they miss out the simple things they can do in life. Being just more active in general, not park the closest to the grocery store so you have the shortest way in. So park further away. Simple things in life that can increase your activity without being actual exercise in the sense that most people understand it. And
Yeah.
that would be a good start in terms of physical activities.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good point. It's the small steps that count, whether it's just, maybe I'm not saying you got to get up 4 a.m. and work out, just super crazy hard before everybody else wakes up. No, like just taking those small steps, like you said, maybe don't park in the front row, park in the back of the parking lot and walk your way up there. One thing that I've started personally was when I would wake up in the morning is I take a walk around my block in the morning. Now, granted, it's cold, so that's the reason why I feel like I'm waking up a lot more. But honestly, when you wake up and you get moving, or just moving throughout the day in general, you feel much better about yourself. And granted, I'm very much a competitive, selfish person in my mind. So when I get up and I walk around, I always go, wow, I'm so much better than everybody else today. I got my steps in. And whether that's something that's going to motivate you, or whether it's something just as simple as I just want to be there for my kids and not miss out on these types of things, that's obviously a very, very good reason. Any reason's a good reason to start. And with this, you talked about some of these risk factors, the being overweight and have obesity, a lack of exercise, and whether those things can eventually lead to high blood pressure, high LDL, and things like that. And then additionally, there's also smoking, which is a very, very big thing here in Warren County. 20% of those that are 18 or older in Warren County smoke, which is obviously very, very not good at all. That's 1 in 5. And granted, we have a much, much older population. However, those things still do not matter. We're seeing a lot of people move, but we're not seeing as many people quit these risk factors or quit these risky behaviors that can put them at risk for, the stress on their heart and heart disease in general. As we're kind of going through, what are some of the biggest risk factors that you see? What are some of the biggest risk factors for heart health, and how do those risk factors how can I change those risk factors into obviously making sure that my heart is the healthiest that it can be?
Yeah, the biggest risk factors are certainly modifiable ones actually by the patient themselves. So that's inactivity, poor diet, excessive calorie intake, and smoking. Those are probably the big ones. Of the modifiable risk factors, obesity is the one that carries probably the most benefit. By reducing obesity, we would reduce hypertension quite a bit. We would reduce the onset of diabetes quite a bit. So the risk factors go down as obesity levels come down. It's easier said than done for most patients, of course, because it has to do with activity patterns as well as nutritional patterns that are acquired over time and maybe even taught from in a way from home, because we're now several generations into our obesity epidemic. So we don't learn good habits necessarily from our parents because they didn't learn them from their parents. So we're several generations in. So I think there's as a country and as a county here, so an educational approach that would be good to educate patients about healthy nutritional choices and healthy activities and the detrimental effects of smoking, and supporting their efforts to reduce or cut down and stop ideally smoking. Because that's a huge risk factor in this county. And a lot of my patients, unfortunately, are smokers. And I know they would be much better off were they to stop smoking, or had they never smoked, and maybe they would not be my patients without that risk factor.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think bringing up the smoking piece is obviously very important. Right now, we're kind of completing our Tar Wars program in the 4th and 5th grades throughout the schools. And we talk about smoking and the risk factors that are associated with it. But one of the first questions that we always ask is, do you know somebody who smokes or vapes? And I have gone through, I think we've been doing this for about 3 weeks. I have 4 schools every single week. And there's not been a single school yet where not every single kid has raised their hand. It's a very, very big issue here in Warren County. And like you said, the parents are kind of the driving force. They set the example for these kids, right? Why would I take care of myself if I saw my dad? He lived until he was such and such years of old, and he seemed like he was in really good health, and so obviously I don't have to take care of it. I've got his genes. I'll be all right. And for a lot of people, that's not necessarily true. And, for women, that's a very, very good thing to point out. It's not talked about. It's not talked about women's health. It's not, obviously spoken of as much as it could be. Women are more likely to have heart attacks, more likely to have cardiac events and things like that. And with that, we kind of we talked about the risk factors, making sure that people are eating right, knowing your blood pressure, maybe get tested for diabetes if you consult your doctor and you decide that's a good thing. Quit smoking, making healthy food choices. We always we did a little bit of a survey and talked with women who maybe felt that they had some reasons for why they didn't do so much of the heart health and things like that. And things that we find were things like, I don't have time, or eating healthy is hard, or, taking care of myself is selfish. And while we do understand the value in those things, and while they're incredibly, as being a mother and, all those things, that is incredibly heroic, and it's absolute 100% one of the biggest sacrifices to make. And it's an incredible position to be in. And with that, you obviously have to take care of yourself. Taking care of yourself is the first priority to make sure that you can take care of everybody else just as well. And so you talked about that education piece as kind of being a barrier. Is there any other barriers, whether it's a policy initiative, maybe, promoting more, maybe it's a community initiative. Maybe we just need to promote more women's heart health. Maybe it's something that we can help out as. Maybe it's a policy initiative. Is there anything that you're kind of seeing that you're like, I would like to see this change so then we can progress a little bit faster?
I think in general, it should be probably more of a topic for our society. I think a good opportunity is when it comes to schools, really, to educate the children early in healthy habits, and they can then translate hopefully into a healthier generation that can then pass that on to their own children. When it comes to women's health and general health, our primary care offices are a good location where we can educate patients and set expectations right too. You see, it's not useful to change your habits in the short term if there are habits that you or actions that you cannot make a habit of because they're too stringent. It's better to take care of small things that you can sustain rather than big leaps in changes in habits and dietary activities and actions that lead to sudden drops in body weight, for instance, but you could never sustain that to actually live healthy. So I think education in the primary care offices, in schools, will be important. I'm not sure how much you can legislate that, as a county, but awareness is, I think, key, and really expectations are important. It's important to understand that there's more to activity and healthy diet than just weight loss, for instance. So many times we focus on weight loss. Patients will give up after a while because the weight loss is something that comes later with activities. Once you start being active, you're more able to do things. You're stronger. You're metabolically healthier. Your sugar and blood pressure comes down. Your weight might not change as quickly or at all for a while. So that should not be the main focus, for instance. The weight gain loss comes with activities and healthy diets eventually. But if you make that the main source of your inspiration for weight loss or a change in your habits, you get discouraged quickly because the scale doesn't change quickly. And then patients give up. So setting expectations right is really important because everybody is set differently in how their body wants to be in terms of weight or also body fat distribution, which is different between men and women, and which
Absolutely.
always there are risk factors for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I really like your piece of the education piece is obviously a very big thing. And I think health education in general it's not something that's seen as really essential, which it's a shame because for me myself here in Queensbury, I had one health class for one semester, and it was my freshman year, so about 8 years ago.
Yeah.
So obviously that type of information isn't going to hold on as people go on later in life, and that's obviously something that you don't want. As we kind of talked about with the overall just the the awareness of heart health. Heart health kind of leads to many other things. It can lead to changes in your mood. It can lead to changes in your body function. It can lead to all sorts of different things. Your heart is very, very essential to just being you and being happy and healthy. And as you kind of talked about, making the focus on weight loss and making the focus on a number or something like that, while it can give you an end goal, it shouldn't be your source of motivation. It shouldn't be the reason why you get up and go and do these things. And exercise has been proven time and time again through hundreds and thousands of studies, the amount of endorphins and things that you're getting released from your brain to say this is good, this is what we want to do. That's a very, very big piece. Is there the obviously with the high blood pressure and everything like that, with foods and eating healthy, it can be kind of difficult. Are there any foods in particular that you would like to see further integrated into diet, whether it's just a category of saying people need to eat more vegetables, people need to eat more fruit, or maybe they need to eat less of other things such as junk food or red meats, or maybe even drinks, to drink more water and not so much energy drinks and
Yeah.
alcohol and things like that.
Right. And these are not new things for everybody to hear. They're sometimes harder to adhere to for several reasons. Certainly, higher quality foods are better. And in general, a diet that's more incorporating fruits and vegetables is certainly better and healthier. It's better and healthier than juices because you can have a lot of calories in a glass of juice, and you couldn't eat that many fruit because it has a natural limiting factor how full you feel.
Mm-hmm.
So fruit juices may be good, but it leads to a lot of calories if you overdo it. So if you had the actual fruit, it would be better. The problem, I think, oftentimes is also the cost, because healthier foods tend to cost more, and lower quality foods are more affordable, especially lately. So there's a barrier, certainly, that we see, that some patients that I see are just simply unable to afford the very healthy quality foods. And they have to resort to the lesser quality foods, which are not good for them because they have, unhealthy fats in them, or higher levels of sugar in them. And sometimes they're pre-packaged, and there's a lot of hidden salts in them, which is not good, because a lot of our population is hypertensive, which comes with obesity. And then if you put a high load of salt into the diet with it, it drives the pressure up further, compounding the risks. So low salt, adequate hydration is very key, and doesn't always have to be water, although it's of course one of the best hydrants we have. So, but awareness of calories, but incorporate certainly fruits and vegetables if you can in your diet. That's very important. Otherwise, you have a diet high in refined products and refined sugar and white flour, and which is not so healthy. It's a lot of calories, and also it leads to a spike in sugar, which leads to an insulin spike, which is detrimental to health. So if you can manage to keep your sugar more level, which is done much easier with whole grains and fruits and vegetables than with refined sugars that we find, unfortunately, in a lot of things. Sometimes even in some breads we have sugar, or high fructose corn syrup.
Absolutely. Reading the nutrition labels, that's obviously something that I'm guilty of not doing 100% of the time, but granted, I've gotten a lot better at it now than I used to be. And diet is a very, very important thing. It really kind of drives everything together. It's the fuel that you put into your body, and you have to make sure you put in the right fuel in order to get the right things out of it that you need. And as we're kind of going through things here, the heart health in women, it's not always clear as to when things are going wrong, such as a cardiac event, or things like that. And the symptoms can kind of produce themselves a little bit, or present themselves a little bit differently than they would in men. And as we're kind of talking in here, what are some of the signs and symptoms that people can kind of see for cardiac events, whether it's just in men or in women? Obviously the whole clutching your chest and dropping your knees to the ground type of thing, that's not obviously very realistic. So what are the signs and symptoms of a cardiac event inside of you?
Yeah. So the cardiac event, that would be more an acute event. So that's the tail end of this whole spectrum. If a lot of things that you did do or didn't do went wrong, in the end, it culminates into a cardiac event. The goal, of course, is to, for one, find a onset of heart disease earlier than the event occurs. When the event occurs, and when you come to the emergency room, that's important, but it's late. In the acute event, sometimes the symptoms can differ in men and women, although studies have shown that many symptoms are very similar. But in women, you can also have symptoms that are not as classic sometimes, and still we have to be vigilant about them. So in the emergency room, we have lab work and EKGs where we can objectively test. For patients at home, I always recommend to pay attention to things that are different for you for the same levels of activities you do. If you usually walk your dog, or you go on normal walks, or usual chores at home, walking the flight of stairs, if you usually can do that fine, all of a sudden you get some chest heaviness or chest tightness or burning sensation or shortness of breath with it, even if it's not the classic chest pain, which is actually not that common to get chest pain per se. That should get your attention. So anything that's different from the usual, and that applies to women and men equally. So anything that's different from the usual for you should be assigned to have that assessed by your doctor, because can be a sign of cardiac conditions as well as other conditions. But if you, for no good reason, suddenly cannot do the normal things you do without having some symptoms, even if they don't appear typical to you, it should be a marker.
100%. I think that that's a very important piece to bring out, is that it's, you know your body best. You know what feels normal, you know what does not feel normal. And when things don't start feeling normal, that's a sign of something. And you should definitely probably get that checked out. One thing that I have found, and I found it through my own experience with my own mother. God bless her. She has put up with me through, for 22 years, and I hope she continues. But it's one thing that I think I have an experience of, and I think a lot of people have an experience of, is moms are always willing to put everybody else first and put themselves last. It's something that, well, yes, it's very heroic, and it's very something that, it's extremely selfless, and 100% we applaud everybody that does that. Don't ignore the signs. Don't ignore something that doesn't feel 100% normal.
Yeah.
It's very, very common for people to kind of sit there and be like, oh man, I've had this neck pain, and it's going into my back, and it just feels like it's radiating. My jaw kind of hurts, and all this type of stuff. And they just assume maybe I'm sore. And it's like, well, you didn't exercise for the past 5 years, so I don't know what you'd be sore from. But there's always those types of things kind of happening. So just listen to your body, understand what it needs. And most of the time, from my experience, is if you listen to your body, it'll probably tell you exactly what it needs most of the time.
That is very correct. And especially, as you mentioned, for mothers, they're having their priorities often their children at home, and they have no time to take care of their own health or find time to go to the doctor for themselves. But they should, of course. It's very important for their own sake and for their family's sake as well. And so don't ignore these symptoms, and don't try to self-diagnose and think, it's probably nothing, or it's probably just reflux. If it feels unusual, and it's a pattern, especially if it's recurrent, if it can be provoked by activities and it's not letting off over time, you should inform your physician and have that checked out. Many times these symptoms are not cardiac, obviously, but our job will be to find a few where it might be cardiac and take action before it comes to a big event. Because when you have symptoms, that means you're in a stage where you haven't had damage yet to the heart muscle. While when you have an event, there will be damage to the muscle, and that cannot always be recovered. So acting upon symptoms allows you to be one step ahead of the damage. And so it's very important to not ignore these signs, even if they don't feel quite typical to you or quite as concerning. Bring them up with your physician. And there are good tests and non-invasive tests that we can do to figure out if you're affected by heart disease or not.
Absolutely. It's always better to be safe rather than sorry. It's always easier to fix the problem before it's a problem rather than after it is now a bigger problem. Don't obviously wait. Know the signs, know the symptoms, understand yourself, understand your risk factors, and 100% make sure you do these changes. Make sure you start some of these changes if you need to. It's obviously, we talked about in the beginning, the small steps. That's what counts. That's the first step. You don't walk a mile by just going like that. You have to take that first step. You have to go and do the little things. And even if you can't find time, there's always ways to do it. For example, if you're always going to the grocery store Sunday, I got to go to the grocery store. I got to pick up the groceries for the week, park in the back of the parking lot, walk all the way up to the front. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anything at all, even if it's just a quick 10-minute block, you walk around with the dog, doing anything and is super duper important. And no matter how small it is, no matter how unimportant it may seem, it compounds, it builds up on top of each other. And then you will find that you've had massive, massive improvements. And
activity is better than no activity. That's for sure. And then you can build on that as much as possible. It's important also to have your regular visits with your primary doctors. because there are some screening tools they employ, some simple lab work, for instance, to see if you have a elevated blood sugar, or they check your pressure. They assess cholesterol levels to see if you're affected genetically by high cholesterol. These risk factors play a role because many times, by the time the patient is symptomatic, it's already relatively advanced disease, even if it's not a condition that has damaged the heart muscle yet. So ideally, we would like to see the patient early so we can prevent the progression of disease towards a symptomatic disease or a cardiac event, and which is done really by risk factor control, as you mentioned earlier. And the ones that you can control are, of course, smoking habits, activity, weight loss, and others might be more genetically driven, like very high cholesterol levels, for instance, or some patients have diabetes in spite of doing everything right. You can't out-exercise everything. So exercise is very important, absolutely, in healthy diet. And if that's not enough, that's when the doctors have options to help you beyond that.
Absolutely. And speaking of options, in order to kind of help patients and help them live their full life and live their best life, what kind of services do you guys at Adirondack Cardiology or at Glens Falls Hospital, what kind of services do you guys provide for the public and for residents of Warren County that may be saying, hey, I kind of got to get checked for these things, or, hey, I'm not 100% if I'm heart healthy or not? What are some resources and what are some initiatives or things that you guys are doing to help out our community?
Yeah, special testing for cardiac patients is available through any cardiologist, of course. Many things are available to the primary care doctor. They can order these tests, let's say stress tests. Oftentimes, they will send the patient specifically to us and then let us find out which tests are the most appropriate. We try to stay minimally invasive, obviously. Depending on your symptoms, we do things like ultrasounds of the heart, which is called an echo. We evaluate blood work to see the cholesterol panel of the patient and sugar and kidney function and such. When we're suspicious about presence of heart disease, like clogging of the vessels, then we can find out with tests that can evaluate for that. These are stress tests. It can be a simple treadmill, oftentimes, though it's combined with an image like an ultrasound with a stress test or a nuclear picture with a stress test. And if we're very suspicious, sometimes we have to be invasive where we use the catheters. What has been more and more used lately, even in asymptomatic patients, is a calcium scoring, which is a type of a CT, which is a non-contrast CT. There is nothing injected into the patient, no medicine, no dye. It's a simple CT. It's only a few seconds it takes to do it. And the purpose of that is to find the burden of plaque within the coronary arteries before they are narrow enough to be symptomatic or even detectable with stress tests. Because in order to detect a vessel to be diseased, it has to be quite narrow, 70, 80% or more tight, before it can show up on a stress test. Wow. That's also the level of blockage you have to be symptomatic. So stress tests correlate well with symptomatic patients, but they're not good in excluding heart disease in asymptomatic patients that might have a condition brewing that is just not active yet in terms of symptoms. And that's very important because when it comes to the heart attacks that you referred to earlier, the events, they don't always happen from narrow blockages that gave you a heads up to begin with. They often actually happen from blockages that are not narrow. They're not obstructive enough to give you symptoms ahead of time necessarily, or render a stress test positive. And that's why everybody heard of people that had a stress test and passed it with flying colors and soon thereafter had a heart event. And it has to do with the anatomy of the plaque and with the fact that sometimes these plaques can erupt and suddenly occlude blood flow. So the burden of plaque can be detected with something like a CT calcium scoring, which the primary care actually can order themselves or the cardiologist can order. And depending on your score, you see where you fall in terms of burden of the condition, even if it's asymptomatic. And if your score is much higher than it should be for your age and sex, then you're advancing rapidly and you better should take action early on. And depending on the burden, we're more or less aggressive about risk factor for modification.
Wow. That's absolutely incredible. I had no idea that it takes, 70 to 80% in order for you to kind of show up on a stress test. That's really incredible. That's not a number that I think very many people know about, let alone myself. And I'm working kind of in the field. So that's really, really awesome to kind of hear and learn about. But that's definitely very scary to hear. But at the same time, it's that's why visiting your doctor is so important. That is why having those regular visits, having those regular conversations with your physician is really, really important. And, if you need be, obviously see your specialist, obviously see, everybody that you definitely need to. And so, as we're kind of wrapping up here about women's heart health and all these wonderful things, is there anything that we didn't quite get to address too that you would like to see, or any final notes that you have for our audience here that may be listening in and saying, oh man, I don't know what to do next. What are some of the, if you could really quick just go over what are some of the first steps? How do I get started? And anything else that you have for them?
Probably the best start is initially to assess where you are with your activity and with your diet, just to be honest with yourself and see how active are you actually. Sometimes you're less active than you think you are, and you can maybe monitor your steps on a little Fitbit or so and see what's your baseline. And once you have your baseline in your dietary habits and your activities, and be honest with yourself, then you can start from there and you can see what are easier things for me to do. What are the things in my diet that I could do well without and that are more habits rather than a need, and start working on cutting back on those. So things that you can eliminate without much suffering in a way, you can start with that and then move from there. So small steps go a long way in the long run. So first is be honest with yourself, have a baseline of your activity so you have a comparison, and evaluate your nutrition. And don't forget about the little things, the snacks that we have. We're a snacking culture, and that adds a lot of calories that we don't consider calories because it was just a little snack. But if you do that, throughout the day, it actually is worth a lot of calories, and oftentimes not the best quality of them either. So once you're aware of that, you can start action. And it's not about changing your life dramatically in a day. That's not going to work. It's not going to be sustainable. You can't change who you are. You have to work with yourself on the things that you're able to do, and gradually you'll get better. So I think a good starting point is really just assess where you are and start with small changes, and that translates into big gains down the road in terms of health.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Kayalar. This is the Just for the Health of It podcast. I'm your host, Drew Crawford. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be safe, be healthy, and as always, we're going to see you guys next time.